So we were talking before about something else that Quebec is doing by virtue of Bill 96, and that, of course, is going to force you to have your home appliances show French, we think, from the factory that way, although that's still in question. But one of the other things that's getting a little bit of attention now is something else that the Quebec government is going to do, and that is to let services, streaming services, social media services like Netflix and Spotify, force them to carry a certain amount of French content. And this comes after a study called the Cultural Sovereignty of Quebec in a Digital Era study suggested this would be okay. In other words, legal. Benoit Pelletier, former Quebec Liberal Intergovernmental Affairs Minister, he's a law professor at the University of Ottawa, weighs in on this now. Mr. Pelletier, thanks for being with us. And I just want to ask the question. I was kind of taken aback when I read the first part, which said the government actually wanted to make sure this was legal or okay. How did they determine that? What was this study telling them?
Well, I don't know what was the study. I have my own opinion on this subject, but I have not been consulted by the government on this question. I saw the report being submitted, being published. Mm-hmm. I read the report. I can comment on the report, but I was not consulted per se by the government of Quebec.
Okay, so in having read, or I'm sorry, in terms of the study itself, what in here is a problem for you, or is anything in here a problem?
Well, there's no problem in terms of the application of the Canadian Constitution, and I will tell you why. That's because the Supreme Court of Canada, over the last 2 years, it began a couple of years ago, admitted the presence of both levels of governments in the same constitutional space. What it does mean, it means that the two levels of government, the provinces and the federal government, can be partners in the same constitutional fields, in the same constitutional space. So there is no, I would say, exclusivity of the competences, of the legislative competences of both levels of governments.
Okay, that said, that's a green light for the government to go ahead. I think some people might question, if you threaten, Netflix is a global company. So if the Quebec government will say, look, unless you meet the quotas that we have set up, what prevents Netflix from simply saying, you know what, we're not interested and we're going to go somewhere else, or not make the service available in Quebec?
Yes, of course, it could be one of the consequences. The application of a bill that has to come, the bill is not passed yet, but the consequences of the bill is something that, of course, is very difficult to predict. And my sense is that the bill will be uneasy to apply in some circumstances, including the circumstances that you just described.
So does that mean the government, again, I understand you're not in the government, do you assume, though, at this point this means negotiation, sitting down with these companies to try to get them to agree, or simply saying this is now the regulation, if you don't follow it, you don't abide by it, you're not allowed to be here?
I think that the government of Quebec is going to choose the second option.
Oh.
Yeah, which is to say, well, there are regulations, they must be applied. They are, let's say, something that must be respected, and I don't think that there will be negotiations because, of course, the Quebec government, first of all, is not the government of a sovereign country, so it certainly diminishes or affects its capacity to negotiate with international companies. Mm-hmm. And the second point is that the competence of Quebec over international affairs, or I would say external affairs, is something that is very imprecise. It's something that is undefined. And my sense is that the Quebec government will not be able to negotiate with the international companies. It will probably go the way you just mentioned, which is to have regulations and to hope for the respect of that regulation.
Yeah, which is interesting because the Broadcast Act, I mean, media in the country is a federal jurisdiction, not a provincial jurisdiction, and this is something they now want to wander into?
Yes, but no, because, again, the Supreme Court of Canada is accepting or authorizing the simultaneous presence of both levels of government in the same constitutional space more and more. Mm-hmm. And if you ask yourself, who has jurisdiction over modernity, everything that is modern? Well, it must be the two levels of government, because if it were not the case, it would affect the spirit of federalism, and we would then go toward a unitary state instead of a sane federalism.
I would ask you, and I know you have to go, I would ask you one last question. As I hear you explain this, I wonder to myself, what's to prevent this government from simply coming in, say, to a place like Montreal and suggesting there are too many English language radio stations here and the quota should be smaller and just simply putting them out of business?
Well, then the radio stations could say that it goes against the freedom of expression, which is guaranteed by the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. So there is a constitution that applies to Quebec, and that applies to Quebec's institutions. So that's my answer to that question.
Okay, I would then say, well, the government has used a notwithstanding clause in the past to violate parts of that. Why would it not consider doing that for broadcasting?
Well, it might do so. We'll see tomorrow with
Bill 21,
case of Bill 21. We'll see tomorrow what the Court of Appeal of Quebec has to say about the notwithstanding provision. But of course, that notwithstanding provision exists, and as you mentioned, it could, in some special cases, I hope, only special cases, I hope, it could be used by the Quebec government and the Quebec Parliament.
Again, I know you have to leave. You want to venture a guess as to what the court will say tomorrow on Bill 21?
Well, I think that the conclusions of the court about Bill 21 will be that some provisions of that bill are unconstitutional. But the court, because of the use of the notwithstanding clause, might not be able to declare these provisions ineffective or void.
Okay. We shall find out by 2:15 tomorrow afternoon. Monsieur Pelletier, thank you so much for your time this afternoon. Appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Benoit Pelletier. So there you go. Look, I'm just trying to lay out a scenario here. If the argument is, going to Netflix and saying to them, unless you have this much French programming, you're not going to be able to broadcast your signal into Quebec. Again, what's to prevent them from going to any media here, traditional media included, and saying, in the city of Montreal, there should be this many French radio stations and this many English radio stations, and there are too many English stations now, and we're going to use the notwithstanding clause to cut that number down to what we think it should be, which should be, one station or two stations as opposed to 4 or 5 or 6 who can broadcast in English.